Good evening. Welcome to your third or fourth Joint Commission meeting.
Okay.
My name, for those of you I haven't met, my name is Kristen Leeson. I'm with the Development Services Department. I'm a senior planner in the Long Range Planning Division, and I work a lot with PPC. So tonight will be our final meeting, and we're going to go over the highlights to date, especially for those who are new, who maybe haven't attended one of these meetings yet. We're going to do a survey results overview. Trish kind of ran through it last time. It's included in your packet, so hopefully you've all done your homework and had a chance to look at it. And we'll just talk about some of that tonight. We're just going to go over it quickly. We'll talk about the mission statement and the 3 problem statements, then strategies and actions, and the final report that we hope to send, which is Exhibit A in your packet. It's a very, very rough draft, but we just want to talk about overarching ideas that you think may be missing from the report that help tell the story of what we have been through and what you want council to know. And then we'll talk about next steps. So we finished step 1 back in September of last year. We hired a consultant who did an existing conditions inventory or statement for us, and then also did a picture of the 2040 housing, and if we continue on the same track, what that might look like. And then right now we are in step 2. So after we got the reports back, we went and we talked with, we had a couple of council work sessions, and we also talked with the school district, service providers, seniors and providers for seniors, small businesses, large businesses, to help identify gaps that they see when they are out in the community and working with our residents and those who work here but may not live here. So we took all that information to bring to you for you to digest and help try and come up with solutions, which is what we are doing tonight. Step 3 will be a policy conversation, and we go back to council on June 12th. So we'll do some discussion in-house, and then we will take that to policy or to city council and talk with them. Please feel free to come to the meeting on June 12th and contribute to that conversation. So survey results, I'm not going to run over all of them. I'm not going to do all the demographics, where people live and how old they are and how much they pay. That's in your packet. But some of the highlights from that, when we asked, when looking for a place to live, what are your more important factors? Ranked from the most important down to the least important, and I just put the top ones in there, are proximity to daily needs, costs, and safety. So these are things to consider when we're talking about solutions and how they fit with the problems as we see them. Which of these statements reflects Issaquah today? Again, most to least, lack of affordable housing, few opportunities for families, particularly young families, lack of overall housing stock, and lack of small housing, such as microhousing or cottage housing, which you have talked about as a possible solution. 66% of people who answered this question said that yes, they know people who have not been able to find a place to live in Issaquah, primarily because of the price of housing. So again, that goes to affordability. And which are successful in outcomes in the next 20 years. There are a range of housing options for households at all stages of life. New housing fits and preserves existing character, yet there's still a diversity of housing types and architecture. And there's a preservation of environmental features. There are opportunities to age in place. Housing for local employees earning $25,000 to $60,000 a year becomes more available. And more single housing for families is present. So I'm going to let Jen take over from here. It was.
Okay, so, and you want to hand these out then?
Right now?
Oh, actually, I'm just going to pass.
Okay.
Okay, hello. My name is Jen Davis Hayes. I work here at the City in Economic Development, and I staff the Economic Vitality Commission. And what we're passing around is actually just a copy of these on one page, because the for the Joint Commission mission statement, what is passing around is actually the problem statements. So again, a reminder for those who were with us for this whole process, but to let the new folks know, basically the housing strategy mission statement we developed is to encourage housing that embraces the city's character and environment while providing a diversity of choices to meet the needs of people who choose to live, work, and play in Issaquah. If any of you have been involved in developing mission statements or vision statements, you know we could probably spend another 20 years tweaking this, but this gives a general outline of what we as a group set out on a mission to do to develop strategies that will address this. And in that, we talked about 3 problem statements that were identified. And so that's what's being passed out. And we'll be referring to those tonight as we talk about the strategies, because we want to remind ourselves that any strategies we talk about or suggest should address one of the problem statements that we have identified. So the first problem statement is that overall housing affordability in Issaquah and the region has decreased for households at all levels. And so some of the data that we provided in previous data sets look at the housing, home prices as well as rents have both increased quickly since 2012. They're less affordable for households below the median income, and low-income housing is not being built near the demand or the goal that we have for ourselves. So again, we understand this is not just about Issaquah, but it's throughout the region, but that's overall affordability has decreased at all levels. Problem statement number 2 is that so individuals and families cannot afford to choose to work and live in Issaquah. So we know that a lot of people make decisions where they choose to live on a lot of different reasons, but if you would like to choose to live in Issaquah, it's really challenging. We have data that shows only 1,500, just a little bit over 1,500 people who live in Issaquah also work in Issaquah. And then looking at what's called workforce housing. So that's between 60% AMI, and so AMI is area median income, to 80% is not being built at the level demanded. And so those are the folks that are not working in their first job entry level, but maybe have moved up and they're maybe in a beginning managerial job or beginning professional job. It's really challenging to find, and so really challenging to find housing if you're making that much money here in Issaquah.
What is the current AMI for Issaquah?
96,000, and so it's based on the King County for a family of 4, and it's based for King County as that's the, and it depends. So if you actually would go into affordable housing as a family, it would depend on your family size, and then yeah. And then problem statement number 3 doesn't address affordability, but more about the diversity of demand. And so we noticed that there's a lot of demand from downsizing baby boomers or millennials for that 1 or 2 bedroom small home or even a condo, and those are not available at the level of demand. And the interesting data I thought was that we always think about Issaquah as a place for families, which it is true, but 30% of Issaquah residents live alone, yet only 10% of our units are 1 bedroom or less. So it's a mismatch of size of household and housing units that are available. So those are the 3 problem statements that we developed over time. We have been talking about for a while. Any initial questions about those or kind of thoughts? We're not here to adjust these or add more, but those are kind of what we've been developed so far. Yes, Issaquah.
Less of a question and more of a comment. We discussed this last time, the foreign tax thing.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about the middle classes, people cannot buy a lot of houses here anymore just because, foreigners. I don't see that bullet point here.
So this data was actually, and I should have mentioned this, we had hired a consultant to do basically a needs assessment and assessment of what's currently existing in Issaquah, looking at demographics, et cetera. And so this data is not, didn't address that, but also isn't data that we've found since or have talked about since. That actual trend, we want to make sure that we note in our report, and actually that was a comment that we'll share from some commissioners who are unable to make the meeting tonight, that we will make sure it's addressed or at least noted in our final report. So thank you. So tonight, why are you here? Besides you want to be outside maybe, but we're here to put a final touches on the strategies for our housing strategy for Issaquah. So the current strategies, and I guess, let me see. Yeah, maybe that's right. Are you actually Exhibit A, right? Right. Or B? Okay, so for those of you who printed out a packet, ignore the Exhibit B in your packet, because we have since updated it to make it hopefully easier to read and easier to follow. So Exhibit B is actually a list of the strategies that we currently have discussed.
And it's actually called XX.
It's-
I didn't realize when I printed it that it
Oh, on the printout, for those who are here, is XX, Exhibit XS/B. So there has been no changes as far as we didn't eliminate things. We just kind of created, again, a format that's a little easier to read, we believe. Oh, and then, okay. So so Exhibit B, again, or XX, is, in our first discussion about strategies, we focused on affordable housing. And we know because of the moratorium, those are things that we needed to address more completely by September than all the other strategies, where some of the strategies we may end up saying, let's explore this, let's do more research on that. And then our last meeting, we started to talk about the broader strategies for housing overall. And so on this XX is the what we've identified so far. And so the idea tonight is to take Exhibit C, and so again, that we've cleaned up as well. And so it looks like the copier accidentally stapled them all together, but it's a 2-page document, it looks like.
Yes.
So we'll be passing those out. And so basically what we want to do tonight is to look at, so the larger printout, the XX, can I get one of those, please? So I know what I'm looking at, is, again, this is kind of our working draft, right? This is will become our final recommendations to City Council. So we want to refine, we want to look at these. Is there anything now that we've been discussing this for 4 meetings that we believe we should add, we should change, we want to remove? And we were using Exhibit C as a resource to look at other strategies that may address the problem statements. So again, why you have a problem statements. So if there's a strategy that you recommend, look at how we want you to, when you are talking about this, we would like you to say this. I believe this addresses strategy 1A or whatever it may be, or just one in general, or number 2 or number 3, because there's a lot of great strategies. As you can tell, there's so many options out there. But in order for us to be successful, we need to focus on how the problem strategies statements we've identified and develop strategies along there. For instance, we want to also take note of trends that we want to include in the final report, and understand that what we do right now is not diving into the details. So we do not need to figure out that this housing is exactly going to be for 30% AMI and it's going to provide job training services and this and that. We are looking for the higher levels general strategies, and that work will be done at a later time. So, are there any questions about what we're doing here? And the other thing we want to pass out, actually, is there have been a few commissioners that were unable to make the meeting tonight, but they did send in comments. And so what we did is we cut and paste exactly as they wrote it. And then put who said it. So I categorized them by topic, and so it's not always going to go exactly to what's on here, but these are just voices that aren't here but have something to say. Again, when it says at the top, this does not mean that these are any more important than any other voice that's spoken tonight about this. And sometimes when you write something, it doesn't come across exactly how the full nuance. So just take that in mind as you look at that. But they did provide some input on some of the things we've talked about. So I guess what I'd like to do first is to look at the strategies 1 through 5. And again, these were identified in the past. And are there any concerns or inserts in editing or removing any of these 5 strategies? So again, if you look on your Exhibit XX, it gives you a little bit more details, some of the pros and cons, and kind of where we got data to back those. So for instance, the accessory dwelling units citywide, that is so those are the mother-in-law apartments, the apartment above in your house or above your garage. So trying to make those easier to build in the city, looking at that. We believe that that would provide some different housing sizes as well as some affordability, because it would be less than a full home you'd have to rent out. And right now, as you can see, the city has about 40 of these permitted. They are currently allowed, but what we do is explore to see if there are some other regulations that we should be looking at that may prohibit builders from pursuing this option.
So one on that, have we looked into at all considering tiny homes for ADU options?
And when you say looking into tiny homes as an ADU option, meaning?
So tiny homes are,
Right.
mobile, all
Yes.
of that. Do we have anything that prohibits tiny homes, and could we kind of consolidate some kind of code around that that would encourage it for ADU use?
Yeah, I'm looking at the planners in the room to find out if we have anything that prohibits tiny homes, because I know that was a trend that we did mark.
Right now, they need to be connected to sewer, and so the tiny homes that we've seen are not connectable to sewer, but that's something we can explore.
But you can't have a detached ADU, correct?
Yeah.
It can't be a
Right.
tiny home in the sense of like it's on like a trailer or
Right.
something. Okay.
But it has to be, but an ADU has to be connected to sewer, is that right?
Everything has to be
Yeah.
connected to sewer.
Yeah. Yeah, so that is definitely something, we didn't call out specifically, but we can look at that as well. I think that is an option that was discussed at the last meeting, looking at that as an option, so thank you. Any other quick comments?
Quick comment.
Yeah.
Last time we talked about, and it's in red, under the pros, we talked about building ADUs to condo standard, or, oh, maybe I'm getting mixed up.
You think maybe apartments to condo standards?
That's,
Mhm.
yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay, no,
Is that,
yep. But I mean, that kind of gets that the second bullet point there where it says is it possible for builders to build with future ADUs in mind? So allowing them to convert their basement into an ADU and thinking about that. So that's, yeah, if there's a way to encourage or even require some of those things, we'll be able to look at that.
A question for number 3, proposed housing levy. Have we looked at Mello Roos? Does that make sense for our town?
Have we looked at, I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Mello Roos. Method of funding in California is very popular, where lots of the utility fees and so on that would normally be passed on to the developers here are actually passed on to residents moving in. So then the residents are actually responsible for paying Mello Roos for 10, 15 years.
Do you know what that is? I'm going to invite Arthur Sullivan up to the mic.
Hi, everyone. I'm Arthur Sullivan, Program Manager of Arch. I've been here a few other nights. That's essentially what King County has done with their sewer system connection, where you pay for, I don't know if it's 10 or 15 years, and you have an option that you can pay it up front, but it's set up to be paid over X number of years. So that is used right now in this county by Metro for wastewater.
So would that be a possibility to use something like that to help offset the proposed housing levy?
Hum another bar.
So if we have a problem with affordable housing, obviously the clientele that's moving into Issaquah has the means, would be able to pay for Mello Roos. So rather than put the developer, or rather than put the housing levy on current residents, put it on the newer residents that are moving into who have the means to pay for some of that.
So that would feel like an impact fee. And in this state, there is legislation under the Growth Management Act as to what type of impact fees can be charged to new developments. And affordable housing is explicitly precluded from being able to be having an impact fee that is allowed to use for impact fees.
So Mello Roos would not be able to go towards.
That's a state of California thing, but the idea of an upfront new development paying some type of impact is allowed with limitations in this state, and affordable housing is not one of those.
We might be able to use Mello Roos to pay for other things, and then the city could then use that money to pay for affordable housing. It's moving
Again,
the pocket around.
I'm going to avoid the term Mello Roos because I'm not exact. If you're saying that's a California situation, you have to sort of, if you're saying new development pay for some of the services or needs of a community resulting from growth, if that's what you're referring to, let's refer to that, because in this state, we typically call that impact fees. And the state legislation is very clear about what that can be, and there's processes for establishing those. And whether or not you can use a financing system where that's paid over time or upfront, that I'm not exactly sure for impact fees. Metro used it for a utility hookup fee, which is a little bit different than an impact fee. But the idea of new development paying for things, I'm trying to figure out what the answer is so that we can acknowledge that, and how it relates to affordability is what I'm struggling with a little bit.
Schools, police departments.
Schools are allowed,
departments.
and police are allowed, and fire are allowed. And right now, this city does, for a number of those, have impact fees. They do waive those for affordable housing. That's a current policy of the city. State law allows that to be waived for if housing that meets certain tests can be waived. And those have been waived by a number of cities, including Issaquah, for a number of those impact fees.
So we could increase the fees passed on to, not the developer, passed on to the new resident coming in for some of those impacts. Then we could take a bucket of money from other city funds and move that towards the affordable housing portion.
So that's where we would have to do legal research to see whether or not that would be interpreted as having to fall within the rules of charging impact fees. And if so, there's a process under state law about how you can determine. You can't just arbitrarily set them wherever you want to set them. There's a process that cities have to go through.
Sure.
So not to diminish the idea that this can be something that's used, I don't know how it translates over to an affordable housing fund, other than, as you're saying, the city is more comfortable using other revenue sources for affordable housing because this is a source that's helping to pay for some of those things otherwise paid for out of a source that you might use from more general fund type sources.
Yeah.
Adding more fees onto new homeowners increases the cost of the housing for those homeowners. So when we're talking about affordable housing, we also want to make sure that the next layer up is able to afford the house.
Right.
And the more impact fees that you put onto that is going to add an increase in value. So you might help them, but you're hurting them. You
Right.
can't do that.
And that could very well be true, but that's also a debatable question as to if impact fees are directly translated over to a house cost. Houses are sold on the market for whatever an owner can get for them. If they know up front, and I've heard developers say, if they know up front there's an impact fee, they look at what they think they can sell a home for, they may offer a little less for a piece of land if they have to, but it may get passed through, it may not. Builders generally will sell a house for whatever the market will bear. And when they have costs, they won't build unless they can figure out a way to have everything balance out. So it can have some kind of impact on the development in general. So that is a consideration that needs to be thought about as well.
I just wanted to mention that we don't have to get into the details, but we do have a policy to have new development pay for the impacts, and so that is through the impact fee, and all those uses, or the fire, police, schools, parks, even non-mobility and other transportation do have impact fees that we just recently went through and did analysis on, and have actually raised them in the last year and a half. And so we can get some information to you to kind of look into that, and we'll see if there's anything else, again, around how California does that that would be pertinent here. And looks like Keith Niven, our Development Services Director, is going to add something to that.
Economic development and development.
Yes, but I thought maybe your DSD hat.
Both on. So Ron, I think what this one is, the strategy here, again, was there was no silver bullet, right? And so if we're going to really deal with this issue, a certain percentage of the incentives need to come from the development community, and a certain amount needs to come from the city. And this one was really aimed at, should a certain amount come from existing residents in a community? Should the existing community help new people get into the community because of the lack of affordable housing? So this one was really intended not to go against the developers, but to really go against the existing community, kind of like the transportation levy that was just brought forward last year. It's last year, right? So I don't, again, testing your guys' empathy for this one. I mean, this one was really, should you all help bring down the cost of housing so that it can be more affordable for the community? This is really loud.
I am empathetic to paying for that out of my own pocket. The idea was Mello Roos might be a strategic tool to further enhance our affordability targets. So additional leverage, but that's all. It's just.
So with the wonder of the technology world, we're able to look up Mello Roos, so I have a little more familiarity. I would still not want anything said now to not be followed up if you're interested. California has a limitation on property taxes. And it's a very severe, called Prop 13, if any of you are familiar with California property tax rules. Mello Roos was a way through voter-approved initiative to exceed the Prop 13 limits. And so basically what you're describing is, can we use property taxes somehow to fund something? And the answer to that is yes, and that's one of the options you have in front of you. The rules that govern in this state how you raise property taxes are different. We don't, we have, and so your comment is sort of along the lines of the entry here of, do we do a property tax levy, which is go to voters to approve something so we have more revenue. And it's dedicated for a specific purpose. In Mello Roos, it's dedicated for certain infrastructure, and it was a way to get around severe limitations under the general property tax rules.
That's because we have those limitations, and that's why I was thinking that might be a good idea.
Right, and what I'm saying is you have also the right through state law to increase property taxes up to a certain amount, and your lid is a lot higher than it is in California under Prop 13 for base. And so you do actually see that idea laid out here in what Keith was describing in that, I don't know which number it is? Number 3. So that's essentially doing what you're describing.
Are there any other thoughts about the housing levy? I'm not asking you to vote for housing levy tonight, but any thoughts?
Would it be helpful to have something that ties together number 2 and number 9, I think, and a housing levy that kind of pulls them together, something along the lines of, just throwing this out as an example, but something where the city provides funds to purchase and lease back housing for people that want to age in place that are perhaps on fixed income, then allows people to age in place, then also allows the city to acquire housing that then, when that resident is no longer renting it from the city, it can then become affordable housing for other people.
Yep, you're getting into exactly the type of detail we'd have to define, because I don't know how many people would just vote just to give somebody money without knowing exactly. So that's, if we did a housing levy, we would use our strategy to really define how we're going to spend the money. And I believe we'd have to almost define, like, percentage-wise, how that money would be spent into different categories.
Yeah, because the way I look at it, you can do 3 different things with a housing levy. You can build new housing. And with, for instance, similar to the stuff we're doing with TOD, and then a component of, up to 100% of that can be affordable. You can preserve existing housing by using vouchers or cutting property taxes, so where the city's not acquiring the housing but subsidizing so that it can become affordable. And then you can acquire existing housing in stock that then becomes city-owned or owned by a non-for-profit. So I think whether or not we want to do 1, 2, 3, or some combination of them.
Okay. Any thoughts on that from the other commissioners?
I would also rely on big businesses to contribute to this. One aspect is if you are an employee of Costco or any other big businesses in Issaquah, you want your employees to be residing in Issaquah and make to their work on time, avoid the transportation chaos and whatnot. It's an incentive that we are offering big businesses like Costco by providing that affordable home to their employees. If they can some way compensate for their employees for the affordable houses that the city is providing for them, be a good addition on, get some additional support from big businesses.
Are you suggesting perhaps a tax or a fee that would be added to that or to business?
Not tax or a fee, like, let's say the person, the employee to which we are giving them some affordable housing, whatever is the market housing price, if the employers can offset the.
So they would
price
provide the
which
subsidy?
we brought it down for them to make
Okay.
it affordable for them.
Okay.
If these big businesses can offset that price.
Okay, so it's almost like they have maybe a set aside number of units and they can subsidize to bring their employees in. Okay.
Yeah, I think there should be a conversation around who we target for the affordable housing. And I think the example you provided in terms of employees, but I think also looking at, I think a common example is like school teachers, whether or not they can afford to live here and whether or not we want to take the existing bank of whatever affordable housing that a housing levy would create, whether or not that's just available on a first come, first served people that are income eligible, or whether or not you would want to set aside those units specifically for, say, city employees or school employees. I think that's a really interesting discussion on what the community values.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just looking to Arthur because I know we had last time talked about fair housing rules around that, and I don't know if there's anything you want to just comment with that.
To the first comment about employer assisting with housing, there's two examples out there that give you sort of a bracket of the range of things that might be talked about. One is there's some programs, some in the Chicago area, where employers help employees buy homes. So they help with the down payment, so that was a way to help bring it down. And usually what they find, they do it, and they do it a lot with hospitals and other employees who have a high training cost from turnover. And so the attraction or the appeal or the pitch that's made to companies is it saves them money in the long run. And then often the companies set it up that if you stay in your home 10 years or something and you stay with the company 10 years, they'll forgive that, sort of it's like a down payment assistance. The other example is down in the San Francisco Bay Area. There is a public fund, just like you were talking about this levy idea. And what they have done is it's called the Silicon Valley Manufacturing Group, is the public sector has gotten together with the private sector, and they've created a fund that is used to fund affordable housing. Much of that comes from public sources, but some of that is also coming from local companies. So they just give the money into that fund source, and then there's a board that, they come up with all the criteria that you're describing to sort of allocate those funds. So those are a couple of different ways employers have gotten involved with dealing with housing needs in their community. And then there's more extreme cases if you go back further where companies actually build housing for employees. I mean, if you go back, England did that in a number of communities, and some companies in the US actually did that as well. So that's actually an even more extreme case.
And then can you speak to this, the second half of that?
Oh, yeah,
Oh, yeah.
fair housing.
So the second one is you definitely have to think about fair housing issues, and it gets pretty complex. And the other element too is that if you look at the history of the resources that cities have made available, they're a small piece of that overall funding. And so when that happens, you're using a lot of other funds from federal and national or state sources. So there's the challenges at times related to court cases about how explicit you can be about prioritizing or setting aside. But we have, at times over the years, we try to work with ways like heavy advertising to local employers and things like that. And it's a shifting issue. And so it's one that I think is worth keeping your eye over time because a lot of people raise that issue and see that connection.
Is there something the city provides or can be looked into? Because one problem that I keep hearing from friends is that apartment complex places in the city that used to have Section 8 families are being sold to new management or owners. And then Section 8, which is affordable housing, is being eliminated. Is there something in the city or in all the discussions we've had that has addressed that?
So I would guess I would consider that preserving affordable housing, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and so I don't know, yeah, come on up. I'm looking at the strategies we've identified so far, and I don't believe we have anything specifically to that, except for if you would, well, it doesn't say number 2, that's the point, and I'm trying to look on the strategic matrix that was the black and white copy, if there's something more specific. But what you just described it would be addressed in number 2, or could be.
There's 2 types of vouchers. This is federal assistance where residents pay a third of their income and the government pays the difference between that and like a market rent. One is where it gets tied to a building and it stays with that building over time. The other is when a resident gets it and they try to find an apartment in the community. For the former, that has been the #1 priority of the cities in East King County. We had about 550 units owned privately in East King County. 500 of those have been preserved by getting them sold to nonprofits or getting that owner to refinance with us and other public funders and agree to keep. There's only one building left in all of East King County, and it is in Issaquah, and we're watching it, but that has been a highest priority of the cities in East King County for 20 years, and we've had overall pretty incredible success. We've lost 20 units through sale on the open market out of those 550. For the vouchers, what might be worth considering, and some cities have done this in their preservation language, is they acknowledge that the vouchers where residents have to find units, can you do things to try to make it so that people can use vouchers in your community? Because there's usually a cap on how much rent they can pay, and as your rents go up in a community, it's harder, it can be harder for people to find vouchers in their community. So some cities in their housing strategies in the preservation section have acknowledged explicitly and called out the point you've made more, but it's more related to what are called the mobile vouchers. It's not so much the building-based ones.
Well, the situations I've been hearing from different families in the community is that they're not accepting vouchers anymore at all.
I'm not following the question.
An apartment complex.
Right.
This XYZ families have vouchers, or either of the situations that you just explained from King County to pay for housing.
Right.
They sell the complex, they fix the units a little bit here and there, then they don't accept any more sectionary or vouchers.
Right.
And they increase the rent.
Right.
And it's happening more and more in Issaquah.
Correct. So what?
How can we deal with that?
So there's two things you're describing there. The first is an owner says, I just don't want people with vouchers in my building. The second is the rents in your community have gone up so high that people with vouchers can't pay, they're not allowed to rent in those units because the rents are too high and there's a cap on what they're allowed to pay. For the first issue, what is out there, and some of you may have read about this, even it's in federal way, and I think Auburn in the last year, is they're saying they're passing local ordinances that say it's called source of income discrimination. And they're passing ordinance that says you can't discriminate with someone because of the source of income they're using, i.e. Section 8 or other assistance, when you are looking at somebody for qualifications to move in. Now, you can, and in East King County has adopted that kind of ordinance. Bellevue, Redmond, and Kirkland also have adopted those types of ordinances. That, however, doesn't mean if the owner's rents are still too high, people still won't necessarily get into those units with their vouchers, okay? So what I'm saying is, like, one of the things that's out there that we're working with the Housing Authority now is we have tried to find ways to get people with vouchers, like when we have a land use created affordable unit and it's affordable at 80% of median, that works. And so we're looking at working with the Housing Authority to see if we can get people with vouchers in some of the buildings, even new buildings, in the units that are at least a little below market because of land use requirements. So that's why some of the cities are putting language in. Can we find some ways to make it a little bit easier for people with vouchers to be in our community? And you might leave it at that there, and the follow-up could be either the source of income, or it could be finding ways to get units that have rent levels that are within the means of what the people with vouchers can pay.
Does Issaquah currently have a discrimination of income ordinance?
I do not believe so.
Would that be good to call out as a specific option within the recommendations?
What do people think? What do others think?
And if I remember correctly, I think Seattle was also looking at something about you have to accept people in the order that they apply, so that you can't kind of skip over the first 3 people that apply with vouchers in order to accept somebody who doesn't have a voucher. And that's also discriminatory as well.
That's intended for all renters, not as much for the Section 8, but that's intended for all renters to sort of level the playing field and, maybe it's racial discrimination, all forms of discrimination they're trying to avoid.
All right, any other comments on any of these, the 5 that are on the screen here? Overall, I went a little bit of head nodding or wagging this way that if we move forward, these, without hearing anybody say take one of these off or arguing for changing it, these will end up being developed more and put into the housing strategy we talked to council about.
Where's exclusionary zoning and bonus density? Is that on this? For details? Okay, thank you.
Christy, do you have something?
I was going to say number 4 is really important. Transit-oriented development is a way to kind of cut costs for a family household by proximity to transit or other mobility options to either get to their jobs or to other communities or to services. If any of you were following the Sound Transit 3 discussions, it was stated that a individual without having a car and having to be reliant on a car could save annually up to $10,000. Well, that is obviously a cost saving that could help towards housing. And then that multi-family tax exemption is really important to help keep the cost of housing down as new product is developed. So I definitely would be in support of something along the lines of up to 12 years because it's a way to bring in additional product to help support that need.
I'll echo the comments on TOD. I think, and I made the comment in the previous meeting for the transportation plan, but I think it might be helpful to put in some language or a comment about working with Sound Transit, with the new Sound Transit station. I think the Sound Transit 3 package specifically includes funding for TOD. Mm-hmm. And given that we have a station coming, it might be good to have the city start looking towards that and providing the city side of funding in order to maximize that benefit if and when that gets built.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're actually planning a TOD right now.
No, but that one's adjacent to the current transit center.
Exactly. So yeah, so we would be
in addition to that, but then trying to
exactly.
continue along that with the light rail station.
It makes a lot of sense once we know where that station will be. That stationary planning does not start until 2024. So, but obviously, doing a little bit of the work now around TOD, we'll become experts and we'll potentially have additional product.
Definitely, yeah.
Yep.
I also wanted to suggest with TOD, is there any way the city can pressure Metro to give us an Orca card machine for the city? There is not one in our city. Okay. People who want to have an Orca card or load money onto it, they can't do it at a transit center. They have to go to a grocery store first. Huh. Well, how are they going to get to the grocery store when they live right next to the transit center? It just doesn't work. But is there anything the city could do to pressure Metro for that?
Okay. Well, we'll look at that.
As part of TOD, because it's useless if you can't get a card to get on the bus.
Yeah, so we can also maybe look at the TOD that we're working with the developers to see if that makes sense. Any other thoughts? Oh, wait a second.
On 1A, one of the things we've pointed out is, the rents have increased quite a lot and rents are really high in this area. And between the points, on the action items between 1 and 9, can you help me understand which one specifically address this problem?
For the rents. So, let's see. So number 1 could, it's not a guarantee, but accessory dwelling units, again, typically smaller size, so would be lower rent, right? Support preservation of existing affordable housing. So then those rents, in whatever method we do, wouldn't raise as quickly or be as expensive as other rental units. I think the first 5 deal with affordable housing. And so I think all of those would, because inclusionary zoning basically says that you must include a certain percentage of affordable housing. And as Keith mentioned before, not one of these strategies is going to be a silver bullet. We're not going to be able to solve the problem with 1 or 2 or even 10 or 20, but it's looking at different stakeholders that can help be part of the conversation and part of the solution. And so that is more on the developer side. So allowing them to build maybe another level if they provide some affordable housing they weren't going to plan to provide. Yeah, and I think the number 8, which is on the third page, talking about diverse housing models, so cottages and duplexes and multiplexes, again, having smaller and different size units, you know, potentially you would think turns into or relates to how much you can charge, but again, it's not guaranteed to be affordable housing, but it gives a spectrum of affordability.
So, have we talked about rent control at all? I know Washington State used to have it. It got repealed in 1981 because we had a Republican Senate, and the lobbyists paid money. It's not completely outside the realm of discussion, right? Is it?
I'm looking at Arthur for rent control. Are we? I know we talked about this last time as well. It's prohibited. It's prohibited by the state, yeah. So I guess he's saying go into the state and get it unprohibited to actually allow it again. And that's something we could look at. You know, I think it's a pretty uphill battle, but that's my personal opinion, not my legal lobbying opinion, so.
I've got one question here for number 9. We're supporting housing options and services to enable seniors to stay in their homes and neighborhoods. We're also potentially asking seniors to move to condos as a step, maybe as a step down. Most of the in fact, I think all condos now being developed in Issaquah are multi-story. And seniors have struggled with stairs, so maybe we want to have a percentage of this be single-story units for those with disabilities.
Well, I would disagree on that one. I mean, when I live in a condo, it has an elevator, and I would say half the people in my building are people that have retired and have moved down. And then I think also, I don't think, if you have an opportunity to build a multi-story building and you're building a one-story building so someone doesn't have to walk up the stairs, I think that's a missed opportunity.
I'm not referring to the actual building being single-story, but
Oh, just having units on the ground floor?
Right.
Oh, okay,
So-
I'm sorry.
But not having a townhome stacked.
Well, you could have a
type of thing.
townhome stack as long as you have maybe an elevator or something, or
Sure.
or
I think that's-
high-rise, but single-story units.
Sure, sure. Yeah. Yes, yes. Anybody?
So you have on here legislation to support condominiums, and that conversation was focusing, right now the market is building townhomes, you know, in terms of a building type, and not building flats, multi-story flats. In your comment, I just want to clarify, if there were multi-story buildings that are condominiums, but they are like elevator served common entry, would that address the point you're making?
Yes.
Okay. So then I would sort of argue that the condominium legislation we're talking about is to support the forms of condos that we haven't been seeing, which are these stacked flat types, which would have the side benefit, additional beneficiary of maybe serving seniors who want to move out. Would that cover your comment?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes, and that's number 6 up there. And what we discussed before, and you can read a little more, is that the several years ago, the liability laws changed, and there's quite a few entities that are continuing to talk to our legislatures about changing that, because it has resulted in, again, townhomes and multifamily rental versus ownership opportunities, so.
I have a general question. I don't see in any of the 9 homelessness showing up specifically. And maybe it's not exactly the right place, but I think in the previous meeting we did talk about sort of the full range of everybody. And it might be, so maybe one question, maybe it is in there and I'm just not seeing it. And maybe a solution would be, I noticed on the strategy matrix, there's, a category of, is it like special needs and seniors are addressed kind of in one place. So maybe 9 could actually be, if needed, 9 could be expanded to kind of just deal with special needs generally, including seniors, and homelessness could be addressed in there. I don't know, it's just an idea. But maybe it's in there somewhere else, Chris, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't think we are addressing homelessness in any of the other categories specifically. Do you think, Martha?
Not at this higher level, but.
It would be problem statement 3, though.
And I think Arthur could speak to this too, but the point about using our dollars to leverage other public dollars, those often come with requirements or you get more points, so maybe increased likelihood of funding, if you designate a certain percentage of units for folks exiting or coming out of homelessness. But so we wouldn't see that level of detail at the strategy level, but still an additional idea to your point for number 9. Yes, yeah. And
So number 3, or
3?
what did you say? So I know Trish mentioned number 3, which is the levy, and so that, again, could be addressed there.
No, problem statement 3.
Oh, problem statement 3.
The housing
Oh,
diversity
but
that,
also the levy.
right.
The levy
yeah.
could address that as well, as
Right.
far as a funding resource. So what do folks think about number 9? And so I know we did have a comment from one of our commissioners about expanding resources to support more housing options specifically for seniors. Doesn't believe it makes sense. And I think we just learned, I just learned today that actually the percentage-wise of our community, seniors as a percentage have decreased. So while we see a lot of senior housing and I think, wow, there's a lot more seniors here, there are more seniors here, but there's also a lot more of other people here. So so what do you folks think about expanding number 9 to include not just seniors, but special needs, homelessness, and other? It seems to kind of be broader. And again, we're not getting down to the details of what exactly and how tonight, but it will address that broader population that you're right, that in problem statement number 3 addresses that.
Excuse me, could that include assisted living for disabled and handicaps?
Yeah. Okay. So as you notice, numbers 7, 8, and 9 are in red because those were added at last meeting, so they haven't been as vetted. Maybe not have had as much time to think about those. So let's look at those directly. So number 7 is looking at zoning codes to accommodate single-room occupancy, SROs, or mini suites in multifamily zones. And so this is a little bit of the shared spaces, apartments, those type of things. What do folks think about that concept?
So I think if we're looking at 30% of our residents currently living alone, we have to question whether or not they're living alone in current housing stock, which only 8% is single bedroom, if they're choosing to live in a 2-bedroom unit because they want the extra space, or whether they're choosing to live in it because they want to live in Issaquah and that's the only housing stock. If it's the former, then creating SROs and apartments and things like that isn't really going to appeal to the type of person who is currently living in Issaquah necessarily. So I'm not sure how much that I would choose as a direction to go, but I think tying that in, or at least being associated with the bonus density and the inclusionary zoning in 5 and just encouraging smaller units in that way rather than necessarily SROs could be one way to look at it.
What do others think?
I think I'd argue that the kind of people that want to live in an SRO are not currently living in Issaquah because it's just not an option too. So I think even if a lot of the people that are living by themselves and perhaps a detached house because they own it, I think the people that would be taking advantage of the SROs would be people that would be moving into Issaquah rather than people currently in Issaquah moving from one type of housing stock to the other. I think either way, I think it's a good thing because I think we need to, especially looking at things regionally, we need to be adding more housing stock of all kinds. And SRO is simply one of many types of housing that the city needs to be adding.
What kind of incentive could be provided for seniors? Because some of them live in a 2-3-bedroom house because they've been living there all their lives in Issaquah when it was affordable. But what kind of incentive could be offered to them to move into smaller apartments, making those houses available for bigger families?
Okay, we
Because
can look
they're
at if there's
fixed income and-
incentives in other places or programs that have encouraged seniors to basically downsize. So I think then you have to have the opportunity to, or that unit that works for them, as we talked about with single story or single living story living space, or maybe having that extra bedroom still so that that family can come visit, but not 4 extra bedrooms, right? So we can look at what programs exist for that, because we haven't done that research to know.
And I think that makes a really good point, and it's not necessarily, I think, something I would envision the city doing, but maybe there's an opportunity with the local nonprofit that, you know, you see online the volunteer connection sites. Perhaps there's a way to connect roommates, because if you think about if you are a senior citizen or living on your own, there's a lot of potential fear and a lot of work, or just not understanding what the rules are to finding a roommate. And if there was a group that could facilitate and make that easy and safe, I think a lot more people, if it was visible, might take advantage of that. So that's a way to open up households that have rooms that could be used and benefit from that shared accommodation.
Good.
Actually, second her, she almost took the words out of my mouth.
Ditto.
My next comment was on as far as the SROs. If we build too many SROs, it's not as efficient use of space as a 2-bedroom necessarily, because a 2-bedroom has sometimes 1 bath and 1 kitchen with 2 people living in it. So you could have roommate situation, which then gives you a better affordable housing, because if you're paying a rent of, say, $1,000 a month for a studio or single room, and you're paying $1,500 a month for a 2-bedroom, rent the 2-bedroom out to a roommate, split the rent, and you're actually now more affordable.
Clarification on that, though, but on SROs, that's different than a studio, though. An SRO is where you might have just a room, and then you still have then common space where the shower and the kitchen is, correct? SROs are different than, because you're correct, I think a studio, you're repeating bathrooms and you're repeating ovens. But if in an SRO, it's literally just a room with a bed and a closet. Yeah, correct. Much more of a dorm type setup. Is that correct?
SRO is almost more of a co-op.
Along those lines.
Pardon?
And are SROs currently allowed in Issaquah? Let me put this another way. What's the current cap on bedrooms you can have in a common, in a single dwelling unit?
I don't know that we know that off. Oh, maybe he knows.
I know we include, I think, 5 or 6 unrelated people as a group home.
Right. So
That's the definition of
the
family.
odds are most cities, you could probably find a way to build them. It just might get really expensive to deal with all the codes and everything that go with them. And so it may make it impractical from a marketing, from what you're going to rent the units for. So it can be a subtle kind of thing as to what you might do to accommodate an SRO. But most cities, I think, have provisions that allow various forms of, that do allow, but we find the actual SRO you've described, the market generally isn't doing. They are doing more, maybe the kitchen is shared, but there's still a microwave in the unit. And so people might not need it. And that's what we're seeing built on the east side right now, is they aren't considered exactly studio units. But each unit, you have a microwave and you have a very small bathroom, and you might only have 1 sink for both the bathroom and the kitchen kind of space. And that's what we're seeing the market, at least the one person who's building them in East King County, the way they're doing it. The pure SRO where you just have a room and then you share a bathroom and you share, that's something we'd have to look into to see if to what extent that's allowed. And the way the one builder first started doing it is essentially he did make it like a 6-bedroom house, and you're allowed to have up to 6 people, and so you can do it that way. And so that's another route that people can go. But we're finding that when someone is building something explicitly, they're not doing something quite like what you described. They're doing something that's a morph between a studio and what you described.
A couple comments to spring right off of that. I think it might be helpful along this that I think the city should look at whether or not it makes sense to clarify our zoning to either explicitly allow or not allow that. Because I know, there was a little apartment boom in Seattle 2-3 years ago. That was basically because they figured out the loopholes and the loopholes got closed. I would actually argue that I would like us to go the other way, specifically allow SROs, but then make sure that it's very clear what we mean by it and what we want to allow and at what scale.
So I want to, just to add to your conversation, at the last meeting, what I believe I heard saying is if you are looking at that, the idea was not necessarily universally in the city, but if it is something where it's a special kind of zoning, look at where you do it to make sure it's very transit rich. And so
Oh, yeah, definitely. No, I think SROs I generally think, I'm generally squeamish when I say, oh, we only want a certain type of housing in one spot. I think SROs is very much something where it's appropriate to allow it only in specific sections of the city. But I think it would be great that within the transit-rich parts of the cities, we clarify our zoning and make it very clear to developers that, yes, this is welcome. Because I think, and to wander into cliche, I think I read a lot about how millennials, of which I'm one, are very much into that kind of like co-living space, and you see it a lot in places like Chicago, New York. And I don't see why Issaquah couldn't have. I mean, it's not something you would see built everywhere. I think it's certainly it would be a piece of the puzzle. And I think it's something that we should explore and perhaps embrace.
And I think Lincoln. I'm sorry. I just want to mention.
One point on that is. So it's a great thought, and here's the deal, is most builders don't like to be guinea pigs. And so just allowing it doesn't necessarily, and unlikely won't mean it's going to happen, because what's going to happen is most builders will say, well, there's no tested market in Issaquah to do an SRO. So I'm not going to go ahead and finance that kind of a project because I don't know what kind of return I'm going to get on my investment. So if this group really thinks that's an important piece of the puzzle, then it goes beyond just making sure that the code would allow it. It's how do you then facilitate one to happen so that the rest of the builders can then see whether or not it's marketable or not, right? I mean, because that's part of the puzzle, is they're going to look and see what kind of return. As Arthur mentioned, there's been, I think from last time he said there was a builder in Bellevue that did one, and then there's the one in Redmond that's currently working on a version. But if we see this as being a housing type that's truly important for our diversity needs and desires, then it's going to go beyond just making sure the code allows it. It's how do you then facilitate getting somebody to actually try it?
Yeah, but I think the first step is to make sure that the code allows it. So I think that needs to come first. And then I think I'd also argue that if it works in Bellevue and Redmond, it's going to come to Issaquah. As long as the region keeps growing, it's going to happen eventually. And I don't think, I'm going to disagree with you, Keith. I don't think the city needs to necessarily go out of its way to facilitate a certain type of development. And the city just needs to allow it. And as long as the region keeps growing at the pace it's growing, eventually some developer is going to say, well, if it works in Bothell and it works in Kirkland, it's going to work in Issaquah, because the cities aren't that different. And once those cities get built out, the growth is coming here one way or another. I think you're right that going forward and facilitating might accelerate it and have that type of housing stock be built a few years earlier. But I think simply allowing it and clarifying it, I think if you allow it, they will come.
I think John.
Just in my opinion.
Hey, Arthur, quick question for you about, you talked a lot about the developer in Redmond doing this time and time and time, and he's basically finishing one, starting another. Is there something in Redmond's ordinances that has enticed him to do that we could do here? Maybe bring him here?
So I guess the question I'm going to put out to the group tonight, given your overall goal, is the purpose of what you're doing here is setting things to be researched in more detail. So whether or not we answer every question tonight, and if that's relevant, the key is it important enough we should look at it? Now, the quick answer is, I believe probably a primary thing that was important for them is parking. But I'm not absolutely positive. But when I talked to city staff recently to clarify what's the difference between a studio and what they're building, and what's the difference in the code, one of their comments was how they look at parking. There may be other things too, but that's, and I'm not sure how far they went with that, but just to illustrate.
Then let me rephrase my comments. I do think it would be worthwhile, as Keith says, to look into what we could do to facilitate SRO construction.
Okay. Okay. Do any opinions against or counter to that? Again, we're researching, and part of it may be it's completely, we have the same codes and it's just not happening yet, and so having those conversations. Okay.
Your plate.
Thank you. Thank you, voice. Yeah, so that's what I was going to mention. So Lincoln, under the housing type, says, he says that, again, linking it to the TOD should be pursued and maybe even going farther and incentivize. And then actually, Ethan's comment was more about, we believe it's like he would be opposed, and I think part of it is his comments are about changing the character. And if we talk about keeping it in a more urban, dense area of Issaquah versus having them go out into, a space that's currently more rural and unattached to amenities, he might have a little slightly different perspective on that.
I'm going to play devil's advocate and say that SROs, I think because it's a really new thing, it could be a fad, and we should vet that by researching whether or not the people who live in SROs actually like them before we bring them into our town, because we may be bringing something into our town that isn't sustainable.
Okay, we'll go ahead and look at that as far as research as a trend as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same things, just kind of research what the turnover, how long do they actually stay there, or, just I feel like there just needs to be a little bit more data to support that, because a part of me does feel that it could be a trend, just kind of like these tiny homes and everything, where is it really going to sustain in the long run economically, or is it just because we have such a need for affordable housing that this is just resorting to that?
So I'd like to just put something out there for you to be aware of on that front. Bellevue helped the builder build one 25 years ago. And the person who built them, the logic he used, he was a California developer who noticed that in many urban areas, you have old hotels that get converted to housing for low-cost employees with low salaries. And when he looked at where growth was occurring now and job growth was occurring, you don't have old hotels. And so he saw this as a model towards creating a form of housing, especially for retail workers and other types of workers, single workers in communities, that fills a void that will be probably there long term. And he's been doing this for over 30 years. So I think it's good to research it, but in general, it's creating a form of housing that in urban areas sort of created naturally that's harder to do in an area like Issaquah, because you don't have older hotels or old houses being split up into 5 or 6 units and things like that. So just put that out there for some perspective.
And I also just wanted to add, I think that it would be important to do the research about or any sort of research to support whether it's a fad or not, but also, SRO is a new term, but even in the wording of the strategy, it covers other terms that have been around a lot longer, like boarding home or co-op. Mm-hmm. So it's a new term, but I think the concept has been around and been in communities a long time.
Good point.
Okay. Can I segue to number 8?
Yes,
Is there
please.
something maybe to look into in terms of whether or not the city wants to allow, what it would look like to allow conversion of detached homes into a boarding house type setup? And so, taking a 2 or 3 story home and turning it into a duplex or a triplex, whether that's allowed or where we want to allow that. In particular, like Old Town, where there's a lot of single family homes, whether or not it makes sense to, enable converting those to more of an apartment type setup. And then this might just be a clarifying question. Duplex, multiplex, does that include row houses? Or would that be a distinct building type?
I'm looking to my planners again.
It just means more than 2, like a triplex or,
So-
5. It could be.
I was just
Like
curious.
a row home,
I read a lot
is a row
about
home
row
is
houses as
defined?
being a part of the missing middle. Is there any value in adding that to number 8, or is that covered by multiplex?
I think, and I think it's the same thing.
Okay.
If you find some distinction there, there's no reason not to, if you would like to.
Yeah, because it seems like multiplex, duplex is the number, and then row home is more how they're.
It's more the style. It's the style.
For me, row house is just more than a triplex. I was just curious because I've seen them used not quite interchangeably, but if you guys think they're interchangeable, I don't see any reason to add it.
Yeah, and I think what we see is, also townhomes that were kind of like could be like row homes. I mean, so again, yeah, we can look in the terminology. But in general, we're looking at to allow a more diverse type of family homes to infill in single-family areas, right? So doing a little bit of increased density in those single-family areas. What do folks think about that?
My mom lives in downtown Renton, and downtown Renton has a lot of older homes, specifically close to the Cedar River. And a lot of those have been converted from the single-family home of 4 or 5 bedrooms into duplexes. Maybe they were a split level with an up and a down, or some of them they literally divide the house in half this way. And so both sides have an up and a down. But they've done really well with that. And it doesn't add a whole lot of extra, parking issues and that sort of thing, because they're also very narrow streets. There's a lot of one-ways in downtown Renton. So traffic is definitely an issue down there too. But it's been really successful. So I would encourage at least the duplex model for that.
So it's conversion more than building new.
Right,
Gotcha.
converting
Okay.
the existing ones into smaller units, 2 of them.
Thank you. Any other thoughts of strong reaction for or against for this concept?
I guess with regards to doing so, especially, in Old Town, I'd be for it, and the fact that I think it would, aside from adding affordability, it would add more traction and foot traffic to downtown, correct? I mean, that's what the vision is for Old Town. So, I mean, in order for it to flourish, you kind of have to entice people to live there in order to walk and have it pedestrian friendly. So I think it's kind of a positive more than anything.
Yeah, I think it'd be helpful to buttress the comment that talks about, well, if you add more housing, traffic's going to get worse in Old Town. I think it's really important to counteract that with data that says, exactly as you point out, adding a housing that's within walking of Old Town, and improves. How did you put it? But the foot traffic.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Right, different topic, about the same point. I mean, I know when we use the word diverse here, we are referencing to the housing models and whatnot, but the other aspect of it is how do we encourage more diverse population to move into Issaquah? I mean, I'll just use individual homes as an example to, convey my point across, but we can use that model use it for townhomes or apartments or whatnot. We talk about a couple of points I've seen encouraging developers to develop more, right? So example, if a developer is selling an individual home for $900K or more than $1 million and whatnot, is it a way that we can, encourage them to sell a house that they would potentially sell for $600K or something, to sell it for $350K?
Mm-hmm.
For a person who is able to afford a $900K home, $1 million, $1.1 million might not be a stretch, but for somebody who can only afford a home at $350K,
Mm-hmm.
$500K or $600K is a huge stretch.
Mm-hmm.
So if these developers can come up with plans, or if city can, encourage them to come up with plans where you sell, higher, the houses that you're selling at a premium for more prices, so you can offset
Mm-hmm.
some prices for lower.
Mm-hmm.
You can use that model for, condos or townhomes or whatever.
So a developer would build, say, 10 houses, and we would require 1 or 2 or a certain number to be affordable, basically?
For every house you sell more than
Or
$1 million,
unit.
let's say, you need to sell another house for $350K.
So that is what inclusionary zoning is about. I'm looking to my planners again, because I'm not a planner. But, and that's a requirement to require a certain number of units that are more affordable, and you can define that. So the challenge of if it does, if a developer's building a house that they could sell for 900, why would they sell it for 6, or why would they sell a 6 for 350? There has to be, for them, a reason to do that, because otherwise they wouldn't build it in the first place. So along with those lines, so either it has to be required that you do it, which is inclusionary zoning, or there's an incentive, and that usually is reducing costs, reducing, maybe time so that it does reduce costs, or providing a subsidy. So
I would encourage the city to make it more of a requirement for the developers to do that, because, let's face it, right? If you say, if a developer is not gonna develop that property in Issaquah, where are they gonna go develop it, right?
Okay.
Bellevue and Redmond is already developed, and Snoqualmie is already getting there. So they're not gonna say no to money, which they're gonna eventually get, right? So I say, make it a requirement for them to do that.
Okay, so we'll put a little star number 5, which is, again, the inclusionary zoning. And I think Joan's comment before, the more requirements you put on, it does kind of create the cost, increases the cost, which also potentially could increase the cost for the end user. But I definitely think that what you're talking about fits into number 5. You have something else?
I'll just make one
Yeah,
more
yeah.
point. This kind of a model was used in Columbia City. Columbia City is getting gentrified more, I mean, that's
Yeah.
different, but they use that kind of a model where they have, when newer communities are coming up there, you know, for every house that you sell for, you know, X higher dollar amount, you need to sell a house, which, you know, other
So there must have been some
communities
requirements.
could
I'm not
be
sure
able to
about
allow.
what Seattle has done around Columbia City, or if it was more of a nonprofit that was doing that. So, but you don't know specifically. That's all right. I mean, if you want to talk about it, or.
Well, I mean, so if you're reading the Seattle newspapers lately, you'll see that they're doing rezones where they're giving more development capacity in exchange for some of the units have to be at a certain price point. You've done that for 25 years in your master plan communities, Issaquah Highlands and there, where there were requirements of the builders to provide units at certain price points. So you have been doing that. Other cities have been doing it as well. Usually what's linked to that is some explicit increased value to the developer of the property by city action, either by allowing more units to be built than otherwise we were allowed, or by reducing parking or waiving fees. So there is a quid pro quo, and state legislation sort of implies there should be some type of quid pro quo. But you and Sammamish and Newcastle and Bellevue and Redmond and Kirkland all are doing things like that. And the question is, do we try to do it more? But you do have examples of it in your community and a number of other communities, and Seattle is looking at doing it in as many neighborhoods as they can. And the city in our east side who does it the most is probably Redmond. They do it in almost every neighborhood. And Kirkland does it in about half their neighborhoods, and then others do it more sporadically. And you've done it in like you've done it in 2 neighborhoods or 3. And so that's something that, it's more of a expansion of something you've done when you can, but there's usually a trade-off process that goes with that needs to come with it.
And there's certainly an opportunity to do that as part of the Central Issaquah moratorium, right?
Right. You do have, right, and the urban core is in a 3rd neighborhood.
So it is already covered in that?
In that area.
But it's
It
only
doesn't
covered
cover
in the core, not in the entire central Issaquah
Okay.
area.
just the core area.
I'm more thinking in the context of the moratorium review, the city could consider further increasing capacity.
That's what this is.
Yeah,
Number 5.
exactly. So that's, okay, so that, yes,
That's what
that's
number
what's
5
meant
is,
by,
yes.
okay, that's
Yeah.
what's meant by bonus density.
Yeah.
So that was exactly what I was going to say, as far as I really think we should look at expanding that boundary for the inclusionary zoning. And I would also very much encourage, rather than waiving impact fees, for us to increase density. Because we've already heard from everybody in the city that we want to make sure that transportation and services and schools and all of those are funded. And if we're eliminating or waiving the impact fees, those areas are just going to get worse. And I think we would improve affordability and smaller housing if we're increasing density in order to have more housing in the same area, along with the inclusionary zoning requirement.
Is there anything in the zoning or the codes about, we have areas in Issaquah with houses that have big lots. To divide those lots, the city buys half of the lot, builds affordable housing in those areas?
So we would have to have some resources, and I think that's where number 2, or number 3 rather, the housing levy or some other source, but we'd have to have resources to do that. The city hasn't purchased housing, hasn't been a housing developer in the past. There are nonprofit developers who do that, but that's definitely a partnership we could explore more. But part of it is how do we afford to do that? So could be one of the things that we look at for the proposing the housing levy, is to actually buy land and then say to a nonprofit housing developer, please come and tell us what you can build on this.
Potentially maybe a new bullet point to add.
Okay.
While we're all looking at affordable housing, we're forgetting that we need to have affordable capacity for affordable service providers.
So what do you mean by that? I'm sorry,
So if we have affordable housing options for, let's say, people with disabilities, where are those service providers going to set up shop to support those seniors or those people who have disabilities?
So you're talking about more commercial spaces. Is that what you're talking?
Because their target audience, we're inviting more of the target audience, but if our retail, which is getting very expensive, if they can't afford to be here to support this demographic that we're inviting into our town, we're going to be basically abandoning the demographic that we're trying to serve.
Derek looks like he has a comment.
No, yeah, it was just, I agree. I think something that we see is the footprint of some of those providers is just not that common in Issaquah. So many folks, services in general maybe are too few to support people that are transitory between houses or whatever that might be. But our city in particular doesn't have a lot of brick and mortar support locations. And so I agree with the idea of weaving that in. And I think, AJ, you might have said, the combination of 9 and 2, how those sort of sort together.
Yeah.
I was thinking about in number 9, it talks about, services to enable seniors. We talked about expanding that to go beyond seniors. I would maybe suggest expanding the dive into more info to look at what those services might be, not just housing per se, but the services that complement folks to be able to move into low-income housing.
Great, yeah, you're right. So I think number 9 specifically calls it out again for seniors. We talked about increasing that, so it does mention the services as well. So I think that's covered there.
A few years ago, Issaquah was exploring areas to build a complex where all the services could be provided, like it has in Redmond.
Yes.
Could any of these developers include such structure in their dwellings? That way they could be accommodated, all the services to the surrounding needed people.
And I think, again, then that's going to be addressed in number 9, I believe. So we're kind of going a little, so although it's connected, we're kind of, looking at a little broader than just housing strategy here. But obviously there's some connections we want to make sure we don't miss, because all those points are right on, where if you have housing or population that needs some services, we need to make sure they're successful in those housing spaces. So, comment?
Not on that. I was going to chime in something different. On number 2, are we looking into putting together any language that looks at discouraging and preventing redevelopment that reduces the number of dwelling units? I'm thinking specifically where you take a duplex or a triplex and you tear it down and you build a large home. I know there's been some language, I think it was in Portland, where they looked at preventing that kind of development, that you can't have new construction that reduces the aggregate density. I think that would perhaps qualify under number 2.
Okay, I made a note of that.
And then the same thing, but in the other direction, would we want to consider looking into capping the size of development? I think this kind of goes off what Cynthia was trying to get at earlier, where if you have a developer that's going to be building, say, a large 4-bedroom home on a lot, you would still allow the same total amount of developable space, but you would prohibit building a single-family home and say, okay, if you're going to build a structure that large, it has to be, say, a duplex, or it has to incorporate an ADU. I think, I'm not sure if this has been implemented, but I've definitely seen this in like a think piece that says that basically prevents you from building giant houses, saying that the city would require the developer to build the same volume of living space, but they would require it to be broken up into smaller living units, whether that's something that we would want to require, particularly within the Central Issaquah plan.
So the zoning would preclude single-family housing?
Yes, exactly. You would, basically.
I don't know if there's any zones that preclude explicitly single-family housing.
Just mining.
Okay, urban core, because there's a minimum FAR. So basically, our highest dense area, you have to meet a certain floor area ratio, so meaning how much of building per the actual lot size. And so that would preclude you from building a single story or a house, a single family house. Okay.
but we want to consider, with all this talk about building new affordable housing and boosting the diversity of the housing stock, of saying outside of Central Issaquah, trying to discourage single family home construction and still building family housing, but requiring it to be broken up into the smaller units.
Okay.
I think there's only room for 45 single-family homes left. Everything else is high density.
I was going to say, most of our, zoning left tends to more high density. So, but we can look at it's also if there are, in the current zoning, if there's anything that kind of precludes that. The other piece is, remember, we want to have diversity of housing stock, right? So, we know a single-family house is not bad. Obviously, if we're only getting all single-family housing, we want to shift it this way, but we also don't want to do something that discourages that.
So would you say, so like there's a lot of subdivisions that are still under construction in Issaquah. Would you say that pipeline is pretty much exhausted in terms of greenfield space? I mean, I'm thinking of the developer that's filing to put, 70 homes right off of Newport Way?
So,
I mean, that's the kind of thing that the city in theory could have said, well, no, you have to build 140 duplexes rather than 70 single-family homes.
I mean, if to guess, there's probably around 1,000 more single-family houses could get built in the city. If you include the Highlands and Mallard Bay and Bergsma and Silverado and, I mean, so but it's a finite quantity. That amount of product left in our future has an end that's coming. And there could be other things that happen in the meantime where the city might change the zoning on some of those parcels to upzone them. That's not in the cards right now, but 10 years from now, who knows, right? So, but multifamily, the thing is there's a huge scale differential between the multifamily and the single family. So all of the single family that's left may get you to 1,000, but you look at Atlas and Gateway, and you're at 1,000. You know what I mean? So it's just there's a disproportionate amount of what's coming down both pipes. One pipe's little, one pipe's pretty big in terms of our housing stock.
So you'd say trying to manipulate the 1,000 single-family homes to get 1,400 homes instead isn't really worth fighting, rather than trying to get a couple of 6-story apartment buildings built in central Issaquah, because you get more bang for your buck that way.
I guess my concern is I don't know enough about our future to know. I mean, so you're coming at it from the perspective of we have enough single-family housing. You know, we really want to increase our density overall. And 20 years from now, if all we're building is multifamily, we may all be sitting here, or the next group of us will be sitting here saying, how do we get more single-family housing, right? So I just don't know the answer to that. It's a complicated question, AJ, and I'm going to just say I don't have a crystal ball for that one.
Yeah. Okay.
So on that multifamily idea, I think one of the things that the data really heavily showed was that if we were getting any of the affordability, it was all in the 80% range.
Mm-hmm.
And so on number 4 and number 5, I would really encourage if there's a way to shift that more to the 50% AMI. It seems like when we have given the option for 60 to 80%, everything's ended up at 80%, and that's not giving us as much movement in the direction that we need.
Okay, so, go ahead.
Yeah, so I've been thinking about the housing levy and the impact fees, and I really don't like the idea of passing more fees to existing and new residents, right? 20% of the city's income already comes from property taxes. And I think there's better ways to fund this, like 3% of the income comes only from investment income, right? What I remember from the financials. So the investment income, for example, you can increase that multiple fold.
Okay. So we want to make sure, because we do have one more thing on the agenda tonight. I know it says till 8:30, but I think we're here till 8, because that's already 2 hours, and it kind of gets a little tiring after a while. But are there any other strategies? So we have a lot of notes to, it seems like the 9 here are good. We're going to tweak some, we're going to adjust some, and then do some more research on some of them. Are there any other strategies that are on these strategic matrix, so C, Exhibit C, that you feel are important to include in the strategy final document moving forward? And again, thinking about that with what problem statement does it address that's currently a strategy is not addressing, or doesn't address in the way you believe should. So
Are these all currently included, or are these all not?
No, these are the ones that are like options, so that of other cities that do it, other things that we could do.
That's what I meant. So these are options that are not currently
Yes,
in
yes,
this?
yes. And that's why we reprinted tweaked this, because in the packet, it had these included. And so to make it simpler to look at, we removed the ones that are already in what we're calling the final working draft.
So I think next slide is, let's take a look at number 9.
Mm-hmm.
So number 9, we're focusing a lot on seniors, but I would like to propose that we change that from seniors to seniors and people with disabilities.
Yes, we are planning to do that and looking at assisted living and homelessness and expanding that a bit. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So one other on the strategy matrix, C17, the interjurisdictional programs such as ARCH. That isn't listed. I know it's something that we participate in. Is there a way that we could expand that or use that as a partial focus?
So looking at more regional efforts as a strategy. What do folks think about that?
It's important to work together regionally because the problem of housing is a regional problem. We house people who work elsewhere in the community, in the region, and people who live elsewhere in the region work in Issaquah. There's definitely overlap. If we're not working together, our solutions may not work out the way we plan.
Good point. And I won't say exactly what Arthur would say if he was at the mic, but I think that's one of the concepts of ARCH, is that the efforts together benefit us all versus I want 5 units here and you get 5 units there. And so realizing that folks don't think about city boundaries all that often around that. So any other, so when you're looking at this problem statements sheet, so you got 3 problem statements, is there anything you're feeling is really lacking? And then maybe that helps you to drive to Exhibit C if there's anything additional.
I want to bring up one more point. So we've been looking at everything through the lens of income. Have we talked about making special considerations for as a public servants, people that work in nonprofits? I mean, it's a different lens, and they're not necessarily correlated.
And I think that gets a little bit to the making sure you're looking at fair housing. And so Arthur mentioned before about how we can market specifically to those segments of the population if we had some affordable options. But I think people always think about the teachers and the firefighters and the police officers, and public sector employees and nonprofit employees are definitely kind of in that mix as well. And so I think that's kind of captured there. If we would have some of that, the marketing would be the way to do that. Yeah, unless a specific organization, again, like builds housing for their employees, it's kind of hard to say you can only put, teachers in this building. Yeah.
I was just going to add that going through this, some of the prevention efforts, tenant protections. I think you, to my left,
what letter or number is that?
The source of income anti-discrimination ordinances. I was looking, for example, at C22.
Okay.
That's a state legislation piece, but one of the examples are efforts to protect tenants from, as the example was given earlier, from income or source of income discrimination, just cause evictions. So the eviction prevention efforts. My guess is that is on one tier down from this discussion, but I just wanted to call that out as something that I think is important.
Thank you.
Also on C22, the MFT statute. Right now, we're giving away 12 years worth of impact fees or taxes.
Property taxes.
Yeah, if there's a way that we can reduce that, since we're only requiring 20% of, 20 or 25% to be affordable housing or low-income housing, looking at reducing that.
Okay. And I believe that the cities, the jurisdictions themselves define that percentage of, within the development.
Right, the cities have the flexibility on defining the affordability levels they're looking for. So you may only get, quote, 20%, but you can make it at 50% of median. And again, it's the same comment I made earlier, it's a quid pro quo thing, is how much is the value of the property taxes versus what you get in exchange. So the percentage is set, but you can also do it 8 years. There's an 8 and a 12-year option.
And the 8 years does not require the jurisdiction to provide affordable housing, but they could.
So the state law says if you give a property tax exemption, you're supposed to get public benefit. At 8 year, they leave that totally up to the local jurisdiction to define local benefit, public benefit. At 12 years, the government said, the state legislation says you must have as one of the public benefits, if not all, affordable housing. Now, in East King County, Kirkland has an 8-year benefit and they require affordable housing. So you can also include it as the public benefit you're looking for. So you can also ask for other types of things with the tax exemption program.
Since we're looking, I'm looking at D7.
Okay.
Is we're changing on this, the 11 by 17
Yes.
printout number 9, where it talks about seniors to include disabled. Shouldn't we also change it in D7 to include them?
This is not going to move farther than today. So if it comes off of this list and onto here, then we would talk about, so these are ideas, so if it doesn't fit what we want to put on our working document that's going to move forward, we don't need to change the wording. But the concept you're talking about in D7, we can look at for when we readjust number 9 for the broader audience. So, okay, thank you.
So if we're looking at C17 interjurisdictional programs, I think we should also be looking at C21 regional housing finance strategy.
Okay. C17, thank you. Because that gets the more regional options to look at that. Okay.
So Arthur in this meeting and in the previous meeting mentions this developer that was converting the hotels into SRO and very successful with that. So I wonder about including wording from C7 into our SRO to potentially increase the, so the C7 is allow flexible use of larger sites. So I imagine that would be something like a hotel that wasn't currently an SRO, but had potential to be an SRO.
Thank you. So it feels like we have for our, is it 10 or 9 now? 10 with the regional efforts. It feels like we have captured the broader kind of approach, and then these are the ones we're mentioning now are kind of refining it a bit more. Is that safe to say? So the 9 that we have here, and then the regional efforts would be our strategies that staff are going to go back, do some more research, gather more data, think about long-term, short-term, because obviously we can't do everything all at once, and how that would play out. To have a discussion with council. Is that fair? Now, if you are, at home brushing your teeth tonight or whatever, you can email your commission liaison. If you have some brilliant thought, idea, you read something in the paper tomorrow. This is still a working document, but it seems like we're kind of to the place where we have a good set of strategies and kind of moving on. Is that all right for people? All right. So our next step is actually, so this is in the packets. It is the final report. Who's doing it? She forgot she's doing it, maybe, now. We kind of traded.
All in told, yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly. Ron.
All right. So Exhibit A in our packets is a draft document for what's meant to capture the work thus far and the work of these commissions to bring forward to council. That is correct. And so I think what we're looking for this evening is not, wordsmithing or getting to, what the final version of this document looks like, but some input to help staff kind of build out what's currently kind of an outline for that document that's meant to capture the work that you've done. right?
Yep.
It's
So
our
page
intent.
26 has the outline. That might be the best place to kind of look at. I didn't think missing.
Okay.
Oh, on the bottom.
Yeah, so page 26 and 53 in the packet outlines the components of the document, the report to go to council. So providing some background, why we're doing this work, the process we undertook, refer back to the housing element of our comprehensive plan and the mission statement that was developed for our work. And then each of the 3 steps that we've worked through since we started back in, was it December or earlier, which included a review of comprehensive data, meeting with focus groups to get more input from different segments of the community, our joint meetings, a housing survey. Those are all inputs, right, to this process that we then use to develop our 3 problem statements. And then this process of pulling out, discussing strategies for potential inclusion in our ultimate housing strategy. So are there pieces that are missing from that outline? Modifications? Yes.
Clarification. In that, the problem statement would also list of our strategies that we come up with, or under each problem statement, or?
So that would be in D.
Okay.
Right, in, so step 3, the policy conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, one comment I would make there is like, if we can be more detailed about, like, I mean, like an explicit section where items that are actionable by the city itself, to me, those are low-hanging fruits. If you, if you ask, because it's within the control of the city itself, we are trying to come up with the strategy for our city. So, clearly delineate them, because it's in our hand, right?
Right. So what's city versus or one of the regional strategies, right, would require other parties. Okay.
One comment I have is under step 3, I guess, well, rather it's D3. So considerations in moving forward, that's sort of the implementation phase of it. And I'm wondering if it would be worth kind of pulling that out into its own step, is like an implementation step. And then sort of a question, is this an appropriate place to also kind of briefly describe metrics or benchmarking for the future to see if the strategies are working? Or would that be somewhere else? Or I'm talking kind of high level check-ins.
And for clarification for myself and hopefully others, this is considerations moving forward, even just to get to September.
Just to get to council.
Since these are the kind of initial but I think that's a really great point about the kind of measurement and accountability for this process, and then ultimately for the strategies.
The one point I would make is, so the population of Issaquah is 34,000, and the number of responses I'm seeing is less than 0.5%. A lot of the deductions we might be making from the survey are probably not statistically significant.
So maybe a limitations kind of description of the.
You want to get more data points for the conclusion to be meaningful, right? You want to get more data points.
I had a similar comment just about, so there was some data also about household income and how long people have lived, or if they live and work in Issaquah. So I thought it would also be good to say not only what percent is represented, but how well that scales with what's
a comparison of the demographics of folks who answered versus our community.
Yes. Yeah. So explicitly point out differences in terms of who responded versus who's actually in the community. Yeah.
The other typical point is you want also a representative sample, so you know what I mean, right?
Yes, and so this was not a statistically, this is not a sample of the population. Yes. Elizabeth?
I apologize for not being here. I had the wrong meeting on my calendar and went to the wrong place. On D9, did we discuss that at all? support development of emergency, transitional, and permanent supportive housing?
I don't believe we did.
Oh, homelessness. Is that homelessness?
Yes.
Yeah, so we actually are going to add that to number 9 of the strategies, and we're going to broaden that again. And homelessness is one that thing was specifically mentioned, so.
Thank you.
We'll
Sorry,
make sure
I
to
missed that.
refer to that.
Yeah. So then we can look at the details of D9. Other comments, recommendations? Yeah.
So I'm looking at the idea of this C, step 2, problem statements and then the related data. There was a lot of data that was presented that, I mean, doesn't necessarily fit into those 3 categories of the problem statements, but that paints a larger picture of, you know, some of the things that we're facing, say, in condo statutes and, you know, not being able to build those, that I wouldn't necessarily fit into any of the 3 of those. So there may need to be another area that just talks about a broader picture of the data.
So maybe building out like what we covered in, so it's here like B
Never
step
mind.
1.
Yeah, B1.
Okay,
Yeah.
but make sure that that's comprehensive. Gotcha.
So D, step 3, I see rationale for strategies. It says summary to data linkages, right? You know, when I was going through the notes from prior meetings where, you know, a lot of data is based on the survey conducted like from 2000 to 2010, is that right? Like, you know, the population, you know, what kind of, what percentage of the population is there and whatnot. Are we going to link to those data? Okay.
I think it's broader.
Broader?
So it's the focus groups, the census data, and all the forms that your comments, that's all the data that we talk about that one.
So qualitative and American Community Survey and census data,
Yeah, I mean, my point is like if it is only that, it would concern me because things have progressed way differently over the last 3 or 4 years compared to how it was even earlier in this decade, right?
Yeah, the timeliness. Anything else? If we do all that, we'll have a solid document to bring forward. Okay, and again, to Jen's point, if you've got, you know, a great idea that comes to you, be sure to, you know, reach out to one of your staff liaisons. Okay, comments are due June 1st. There you go.
Read the report and look
Yeah.
at more of the details.
Yeah, so we've just been talking about, you know, based on the outline, what your recommendations would be, but there, some of that document is then built out in Exhibit A. So take a closer look. Let us know. You've got a week to take a look. And I think that's our last.
I
Okay.
have excuse me, I have a little question. I haven't had time to look at all the detailed questions, but I made a comment in previous meetings. Were non-English speakers included in this survey at all?
No, that's good.
No, this survey was not translated or provided in other languages.
Then I think we might be missing an important part of the population.
I agree. Right, so a limitation of that survey tool.
Thank you.
Noted.
You know, one thing I would love to learn more about is what some of the other cities have done recently or what they're planning to do. What's the best way to find that out?
Ask Arthur.
We have a matrix currently that shows what all the other cities do.
Right, that's in the background data.
Yeah, it's in the background information, so I think it's going to be included in this report as well.
And that would have been in your first packet from last week, the report card from, I think it was 2 years ago, where we had what all the other cities have been trying.
And there are a couple other cities who are going through similar processes, working on housing strategies, so that might be a point of like future connection for the commissions.
Get copies of all of them.
Yeah. Arthur's got connections.
Since we've written most of them, so.
So that chart, that matrix of what the other cities was doing was very valuable. So if that's not included in this, I would definitely recommend it.
No, because no.
So I think we'll conclude this portion of it. However, we'd still like to open it up for public comment. So if anyone would like to come up and speak, please do so and just give us your name and your address. Anyone? Steve? I know.
Hi, I'm not sure it's a good sign the city staff knows me before I even come up and introduce myself. Steve Pereira, 170 Northeast Dogwood Street. A couple thoughts I heard. One was I really like the comment from those sitting, try to connect with seniors to see if there's a way of working with senior housing. I know my own experience with my mom. Once you get a certain age, you get set in your certain ways. It's hard to look at that, so I think that's a great opportunity for outreach and connection, whether it's affordable housing or just connecting with a segment of the population. Another thought was, I know when we looked at density for housing, try to incentivize builders, increasing the height limit to have a certain number of rooms. Maybe that could be looked at putting money into a fund or to a kitty to use for affordable housing, not just a unit, but having build it more in a TOD location or someplace else rather than on-site. Another thought was to look at, I'm going to use the word down zoning in the sense of you have the right to use your land for the best possible use. And I think of Pickering Estates, where initially it was going to be smaller size lots, and the builder decided to build larger size homes, more property, take away that ability or limit that ability to have larger size lots, larger size houses to afford more chance for affordable on the scale of less expensive, not necessarily for affordable housing is a relative term these days where even small lots get a high price. My last thought was, one of the comments that came up was, I think in Seattle anyway, you have to, if you're a landlord, you have to take the first person that comes up. I don't know if, I have a duplex and I don't know if I like that idea as much from the standpoint and I'm not trying to say, look at me, I'm done something great. I try to keep it low so that people can afford to live there, and I choose maybe some people that wouldn't be able to afford to live there otherwise. And so I don't like taking away that incentive from people who are trying to do the right thing by saying you have to take the first person that comes in. If we try to talk about incentivizing things for teachers and firefighters and policemen, have some at least discrepancy where the owners can try to do the right thing. So I would just like that and just wanted to share that perspective with each of you. Thank you for struggling with this issue and giving me a chance to learn about what you all are doing. Thank you.
Anyone else like to speak?
Hello, my name is Arjun Malhotra. I actually don't live in Issaquah, I live in Sammamish, but I'm part of the Issaquah Youth Advisory Board, and I decided to come here to just observe what the three commissions are doing, and I found it interesting about the thoughts about how I know that it's a pretty, the decisions are based on like data-driven things, and just like to stress the point that if the survey has such a small percentage that were returned, like such a small sample size isn't like that good for making a decision and could lead to some misconceptions about the community, and just wanted to stress that it's important that when you're trusting in data that the data is good. And then besides that, don't have really anything else to add. Thank you for letting me listen in.
Thank you. Okay, before we leave, we have 2 sets of minutes to approve. So we have.
No, they're not approved.
They're not approved.
Yeah, we don't.
Never mind.
Because there's 3 groups, and
That's
so
true.
we chose not to have them
Okay.
official.
So do we do anything with them?
The reason they're in there is to people that were new to see what everyone had talked about, and that was in the direction.
So change of course.
Yeah.
There are 2 sets of minutes here. We have January 26th and May 11th.
Right, because last time they had asked for that because they
Okay.
didn't know what had happened before. So
That's what I get for
included it.
missing a meeting. Sorry. So, but they're just in there for newcomers and to see what's going on, and that might help you when you're brushing your teeth and come up with, to come up with something else. And you email us by June 1st. So there we go.
Excellent.
Otherwise, I think we are excused.
I think
Anything
we're
else?
done.
All right.
No,
Thank you
great.
so much for your participation in
Great
all
work.
of these meetings. And keep in touch.
Thank you very much for putting this whole thing together. And we realize the hard work and the hours that go into preparing for this, and then we grill you to death, so thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks.
I hope this is nice to, again, sit in the same room with different commissioners. And the